They told us the steam engine was born of fire and coal, a brute force machine that built the modern world. But this is a calculated inversion of its true purpose. The locomotive was never a boiler on wheels. It was a mobile collector, and the station was a resonant node in a planetary grid. The black smoke and hissing steam, they are not signs of power, but the symptoms of a captured, misunderstood technology. Haven't you always felt it? That deep, humming dissonance in the official story, as if we are living inside a poorly remembered dream? Tell us where and when you are watching from. The first rule of forensic analysis is to trust your eyes, not the story you've been told. The narrative is a script, but the physical world is the crime scene. And it is here, in the frozen moments of the 19th century, that the official story begins to hemorrhage credibility. We are told this was an age of invention, of rugged pioneers building a new world with sweat and steam. But the photographs tell a different story. They show an age of inheritance, an age of confusion. Look, we are shown these grand terminals. St. Pancras in London, Grand Central in New York, the Estacao de Luz in Sao Paulo. This is not a matter of stylistic influence. You do not influence someone to build a particle accelerator. This was not an architectural style. It was a standardized technological template, the signature of a single, unified, global civilization that controlled the planet's transportation and energy grid. A civilization that the history books have surgically removed. The Tartarian Empire. This was their network, a planetary system of energy distribution and transport, with these grand stations serving as the primary nodes. The colossal iron and glass roofs were not just to keep the rain off passengers. They were collectors, resonating structures designed to draw in atmospheric energy. The spires, the domes, the ornamental ironwork, these were not aesthetic choices. They were antennae and capacitors, vital components of a wireless energy system. The clock towers, ubiquitous in these structures, were likely not just for telling time, but for harmonic synchronization, keeping each node perfectly in phase with the planetary grid's resonant frequency. Each station was an organ of a single, living, technological body. And then, the body died. The music stopped. After the Great Cataclysm, the reset, the survivors found these silent, magnificent structures half buried in mud. They did not understand their true function. And the new parasitic elite, the architects of our current control matrix, had no intention of letting them find out. These are not mere buildings. They are temples of transit, palaces of iron and glass built on a scale that defies the very era they supposedly belong to. The arches are colossal, soaring into the sky like the ribcage of a fallen titan. The stonework is intricate, massive, assembled with a precision that would challenge our own modern machinery. The ceilings are vast canopies of glass and steel, designed not just to provide shelter, but to gather the light, to resonate with the sky. These structures are symphonies of engineering, humming with a silent, forgotten purpose. They feel ancient, powerful, and profoundly out of place. Now look away from the architecture. Look at the foreground. Look at the people. What do you see? You see men in worn-out clothes, their faces etched with hardship. You see horse-drawn carts, with crude wooden wheels, struggling through streets of mud. Not cobblestone, not pavement, mud. You see a populace that seems disconnected, dwarfed, and bewildered by the very structures they inhabit. This is the central anomaly, the great cognitive dissonance. The infrastructure is that of a highly advanced global civilization, but the inhabitants look like the survivors of a cataclysm, squatting in the ruins of their ancestors. This is the peasant paradox. We are asked to believe that the men who could barely pave a road were simultaneously erecting cathedrals of steel capable of lasting centuries. The evidence of this unified network goes beyond the architecture. It extends to the very purpose of the rails after the reset. The system was rebooted, but for a new, sinister purpose. This brings us to one of the most sanitized and misunderstood chapters of recent history, the orphan trains. The official narrative presents it as a philanthropic endeavor, a story of charity, moving over 200,000 orphaned or abandoned children from the crowded cities of the American East Coast to foster homes in the rural Midwest. It is a cover narrative, designed to mask a program of breathtaking scale and social engineering. Consider the context we have established. A recent cataclysm. A mud flood. Cities wiped clean or partially buried. A massive depopulation event. The The new controllers are left with a vast, inherited infrastructure, cities, buildings, and a continental railway system, but a dramatically reduced, traumatized, and scattered population. How do you repopulate a continent? How do you fill these empty shells of civilization with a new populace? One with no memory of the world before, no allegiance to the old ways, a blank slate upon which a new history can be written. You use the foundling homes, the asylums, the so-called orphanages. These were not charities, they were incubators, collection and processing centers for the human assets of the New World Order. Look closely at these images. Truly look. The official narrative demands that you accept that the men struggling to keep their boots from being swallowed by the mire are the very same men who, just moments before, were orchestrating the construction of these industrial titans. It is a logical absurdity, a violation of causality. If you feel this contradiction in your very bones, if you see the impossibility staring back at you, confirm your observation. A simple click is a vote for the evidence over the story. It ensures this exhibit is not buried again. Now, let us examine the artifacts themselves. The locomotives. We're shown early photographs of these machines. And again, something is profoundly wrong. Many of the earliest designs are inexplicably clean. They lack the enormous, cumbersome tenders required to haul the tons of coal and thousands of gallons of water needed for a conventional steam engine. They appear almost elegant, self-sufficient, as if the crude, brutal appendage for carrying burnt rock was a later, vulgar addition, a desperate modification. And the stations, we were told, the ornate metalwork, the spires reaching for the sky, the intricate domes and finials, were mere Victorian fancy, a decorative flourish. But this is an insult to our intelligence and an ignorance of physics. The children, many of whom were not orphans at all but were simply taken, were the seeds of the new humanity. And the railway was the vector. The inherited Tartarian network became the primary tool for this mass relocation program. The orphan trains were conveyor belts, moving human livestock from the breeding grounds in the east to the empty inherited farmsteads and towns of the west. It was a systematic seeding of the continent, ensuring that the next generation would grow up within the old infrastructure but utterly disconnected from its creators and its true purpose. They would grow up believing the primitive, coal-powered lie because it was the only reality they ever knew. This program wasn't unique to America. Similar mass movements of orphans and populations occurred across the world, in Australia, in Siberia, always following the paths of these ancient, inherited railway lines. The network that once pulsed with free energy and connected a brilliant global civilization was repurposed by the control matrix to distribute a memory-wiped population. The ultimate act of desecration, the cognitive dissonance, is staggering. We are shown photographs of these children, dressed in rags, looking bewildered, standing in front of these impossibly advanced trains and monumental stations. It is the peasant paradox, in its most heartbreaking form. Look again, but see them not as art, but as apparatus. These are not ornaments, they are terminals, antennas, nodes in a planetary grid, designed to draw power from the ether, from the very air we breathe. The same way a cathedral spire was designed to draw a connection to the heavens, these iron spires were designed to draw tangible energy. And then, we dig. We always find ourselves digging. And beneath so many of these grand old stations, we find entire floors buried. Windows that open into packed earth. Doorways that lead to nowhere. These were not basements, they were ground floors. The original ground floors of a world buried in a great and sudden silence. A mud flood. The crime scene is the world around us. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight. We were simply taught not to see it. Now, we arrive at the heart of the deception, the story they sold us. The one printed in glossy textbooks and celebrated in national holidays. It is a story of heroic men with simple tools, taming a wild continent with nothing but grit and determination. It is a stirring tale, a beautiful lie, and like all beautiful lies, it shatters under the cold, unforgiving light of logic. They tell us that vast, continent-spanning railway networks were blasted through mountains and stretched across deserts in a matter of years. We are looking at the inheritors of a kingdom who are being taught to live as serfs within its walls. They traveled on technology they could never hope to build, to live in towns they did not understand, their past erased, their future engineered. This is the true, unspoken function of the railway system in the post-reset world: to manage the fragmentation of a once global civilization and to ensure its survivors would never remember the unity they had lost. This evidence is not hidden in a secret vault. It is hiding in plain sight. The signature of this lost empire is stamped onto the urban landscape of our world. These structures are everywhere. The grand old post office in your city, the central library, the courthouse, the old banks built like Roman temples. They share the same DNA as the railway stations. Over-engineered, out of place, out of time. They are the skeletal remains of a world that was stolen from us. You have seen them. You have walked past them 1,000 times and felt a flicker of something, a sense of awe or strangeness you couldn't quite place. That feeling is your ancestral memory, a whisper from the past telling you that the world is much older and our story much grander than they have told us. The American First Transcontinental Railroad, for instance, a line of nearly 2,000 miles, a spine of iron laid across the Sierra Nevada and the Rockies. The official narrative presents a romantic montage: rugged men, mostly poor immigrants, swinging pickaxes and hammers, tamping earth, lighting fuses on unstable nitroglycerin, all between 1863 and 1869. 6 years. Let that number resonate for a moment. 6 years to grade thousands of miles of terrain, to bore 17 tunnels through solid granite, to build hundreds of bridges over raging rivers and deep chasms, and to lay every single iron rail by hand. They tell us this was accomplished in an era of horse-drawn carts, of hand drills, of steam shovels that were themselves experimental and prone to failure. We are asked to accept this as history. But we are not children listening to a bedtime story. We are forensic investigators, and the crime scene is the timeline itself. The math is the murder weapon. Modern engineering with GPS-guided earth movers, laser tunneling machines, and prefabricated components would classify such a project as a decade-long monumental undertaking. Yet we are told that men with shovels and black powder did it in 6. This is not history. It is a logistical paradox. It is a fairy tale for an unquestioning mind. Look around your own town, your own city. You will find them. These silent stone monuments to a forgotten truth. Tell us where you see them. The map of this lost world is not drawn in ink. It is built in brick and iron, and it is waiting for us to see it with new eyes. They left us the hardware of their civilization, but they made sure we would never find the operating system. We must now confront the most difficult truth of our condition. It is not a truth found in a buried manuscript or a ciphered map. It is an anthropological truth, etched into the very soul of our recent ancestors, and it is a truth of profound sadness. We are a cargo cult civilization, living as ignorant tenants in a technological palace we did not build and do not understand. The evidence is not in what we created, but in how we have misused what we found. The story of the 19th century is not one of invention, but of imitation. It is the story of a traumatized, amnesiac species, attempting to mimic the rituals of the gods who came before. Consider the classic cargo cults of the South Pacific. Islanders who, after witnessing the arrival of military aircraft during the war, built mock runways and wicker airplanes. And we must ask ourselves, does our own intellect, our own common sense, permit us to believe such a thing, or do we feel that familiar, unsettling hum of cognitive dissonance? The feeling that the script we've been handed is missing entire pages, that the plot has a hole large enough to drive a train through. The truth is far simpler and far more profound. They did not build it, they found it. They cleared it. They repaired it. The Herculean task was not one of creation, but of excavation. They were not pioneers forging a new world. They were scavengers in the ruins of an old one, sweeping the mud and debris from a network that was already there, a silent, skeletal testament to a forgotten age. And what of the architects of this grand narrative? The so-called robber barons and captains of industry. Men like Cornelius Vanderbilt, Leland Stanford, or Brazil's own Barão de Mauá. The official history paints them as visionary geniuses, titans who bent the world to their will through sheer force of capital and ambition. They are the protagonists of the industrial fable. But when you look past the gilded portraits and the hagiographies, a different picture emerges. These men were not creators. They were opportunists of the reset. They performed the rituals they had observed, marching in formation, wearing imitation headsets, believing this mimicry would magically summon the cargo-laden planes once more. They copied the form, but had no comprehension of the function. They mistook the effect for the cause. Now, scale that poignant primitive misunderstanding to a planetary level. That is our history. That is the genesis of the Industrial Revolution. The survivors of the Great Reset, our great-great-grandparents, emerged from the silence and the mud into a world populated by inert titans. They found a network of silent, elegant machines resting on tracks that stretched to the horizon. These were not crude iron horses. They were vessels of resonance. Their intricate copper piping and prominent domes designed not for containing pressure, but for channeling it from an unseen source. They were built for a world of clean, atmospheric energy, but that world was gone. The resonance field had been broken. The signal had been lost. And so, our ancestors stood before these dormant engines with the same bovine incomprehension as the islanders before a radio. They saw a piston connected to a wheel. They saw a chamber designed to hold a medium. Their thought process, born of desperation, was a tragic leap of logic backwards. They concluded that the piston needed to be pushed. They were the first to stumble upon the derelict infrastructure of a far more advanced, global civilization. They were not inventors. They were inheritors. They did not finance the impossible construction from scratch. They financed the much more plausible task of reactivating dormant sections of a pre-existing grid. Their genius was not in engineering, but in public relations. They were the masters of a planet-sized cargo cult. They found the silent, magnificent machines and the endless tracks buried under layers of earth, and they figured out a crude way to make them move again. Then they turned to the amnesiac survivors of the catastrophe and declared, "Behold what we have built." They took the credit for the works of a civilization whose name they helped erase, whose technology they could barely comprehend. They are not the fathers of our industrial age. They are its foster parents, who claimed a brilliant orphan as their own and hid the records of its true parentage. They are the wardens of an inherited world, who convinced the inmates they had built the prison. This is the fragile foundation upon which the official narrative is built, an impossible timeline and a cast of mythical founders. It is a story designed to make us feel proud of a recent, primitive struggle, to distract us from the much grander, more ancient legacy that was stolen from our memory. And what is the most primitive, most brutal way to create a push? Fire. Heat. Violent, explosive pressure. They looked at a finely tuned instrument of harmonic physics and saw only a kettle. This is the moment of our great technological fall from grace. The birth of the cold deception was not a conspiracy hatched in a boardroom. It was a mistake born of ignorance, a desperate kludge that was later codified into an industry of control. They took these resonant chambers, these hearts of the machine, and they turned them into furnaces. They ripped out the delicate arrays and stuffed them with burning carbon. The black smoke that we see in every old photograph, the thick billowing steam we associate with power and progress, it is not the sign of a mighty engine. It is the symptom of a dying one. It is the technological equivalent of a terminal fever, the machine's agonizing scream as it is force-fed a poison it was never designed to consume. This act of desecration was then ritualized. It became a new religion. The function was lost, so the performance became everything. The shriek of the steam whistle, once perhaps a precise sonic frequency for network communication, became a crude bellow, a ritualistic announcement of the brute's arrival. They gave us a story of progress born from mud and sweat, because the alternative, that we are the diminished descendants of a technologically superior culture, living in the repurposed ruins of their world, is a truth too destabilizing for their matrix of control. But the cracks in their story are showing. The timeline doesn't add up. The logistics are a fantasy. And you, like us, are beginning to see it, aren't you? You're beginning to question the fable. You are beginning to remember what you were taught to forget. The story they tell us is a fragile thing, a narrative of heroic progress, of industrial titans wrestling a continent into submission with sweat, steel, and steam. We have already examined the visual dissonance of this story, the grand palaces of transport rising from seas of mud, populated by people who look more like inheritors than creators. But now, we must leave the realm of the visual and enter the cold, unforgiving domain of the spreadsheet. We will conduct a forensic audit of their fairy tale. Because history, when it is true, must adhere to the laws of mathematics. And the official narrative of the railway age is, by any rational calculation, profoundly and demonstrably bankrupt. Let us take their crown jewel, the American First Transcontinental Railroad, as our case study. The man shoveling coal into the firebox, the celebrated stoker, was not an engineer. He was the high priest of a new, dirty faith, perpetually feeding the sacrificial fuel to a captive god. The grand station clock towers, structures whose height and metallic composition suggest they were once tuning forks for the entire grid, synchronizing the resonant frequencies across a city, were demoted. Their sacred, energetic function was forgotten, and they became mere timekeepers, their faces now governing the departure and arrival of these lumbering, smoke-belching effigies. We took their antennas and called them decorative spires. We took their atmospheric energy harvesters and called them ornate domes. We took their hydroelectric cathedrals and called them places of worship, and we took their silent, clean locomotives and made them scream with fire and choke on soot. This is the very definition of a cargo cult. We perform the theater of technology without possessing the sacred knowledge behind it. The entire industrial narrative is a performance, a grand, soot-stained play we enact daily to convince ourselves that we are the masters of this house, and not merely its confused, amnesiac inheritors. This creates a deep, unsettling cognitive dissonance in the collective psyche. We are told to celebrate the grimy, back-breaking labor of the coal age as the pinnacle of human endeavor, while standing inside structures so impossibly elegant and advanced that they mock the very story we are being told. The narrative is simple. Roughly 3,000 kilometers of track laid across mountains, deserts, and prairies in a mere 6 years, from 1863 to 1869. A triumph of human will. But will does not forge steel. Will does not move mountains. Logistics do. And the logistics of this story are a mathematical fantasy. First, the steel. A single kilometer of track requires 2 rails. Using the standards of the era, this translates to approximately 100 to 120 metric tons of finished steel rail per kilometer. For 3,000 kilometers, we are looking at a minimum of 300,000 metric tons of rails alone. This number does not include the steel for spikes, for fish plates, for switches, nor the immense tonnage of iron and steel required for the thousands of trestle bridges that span chasms and rivers. A conservative, all-inclusive estimate would push the total requirement closer to 500,000 tons of processed iron and steel. Now let us consult their own records. In 1867, the peak of this construction effort, the total annual production of Bessemer steel, the kind needed for durable rails, in the entire United States, was a mere 20,000 tons. The numbers do not reconcile. They are not even in the same order of magnitude. To produce the required steel at the stated capacity would take not 6 years, but a quarter of a century. We celebrate the brute force of the explosion, while ignoring the subtle genius of the resonance that was our true inheritance. We have been taught to worship the fire, forgetting that we were once meant to command the lightning. This feeling, this ache of a phantom limb, a memory of a future that was stolen from us before we were even born. It is the quiet sorrow of an orphan who senses the ghost of a parent he never knew. If this vision of an amnesiac humanity resonates with you, if you have ever felt that something is profoundly, fundamentally wrong with the story we've been told, then ensure you are subscribed. We need awakened minds for the work ahead. We have been performing the ritual of their technology for long enough. It is time we started to remember its purpose. It is time to stop mimicking the past and start reclaiming it. So how does a civilization forget its own name? It doesn't happen by accident. It is not a slow erosion of memory. It is a violent amputation. The technology we mimicked, the silent, resonant network we retrofitted with soot and steam, did not simply fail. It was murdered. The mechanism of our amnesia was a 2-stage event. First, the physical strike, then the psychological warfare that followed. And this assumes that 100% of the nation's advanced steel output was dedicated to this single project, leaving nothing for the construction of ships, for buildings in burgeoning cities, for other rail lines, or for the tools of a nation. It is a logistical paradox. They claim to have built an industrial artery with a national blood supply of steel that was, by their own admission, functionally anemic. The equation is broken. The inputs do not produce the output. But the steel is only the first layer of this impossibility. Let us assume for a moment that this 500,000 tons of steel magically appeared. How was it transported to the front lines of construction, deep in the untamed wilderness of the Sierra Nevada or the Great Plains? The railway, by definition, did not yet exist in these places. The means of transport were therefore limited to ox-drawn carts and river barges. An ox cart can carry perhaps 2 tons. A single 12-meter rail weighs over 400 kilograms. Imagine the endless, slow-moving caravans of animals, hauling these millions of individual components, piece by piece, across thousands of kilometers of terrain with no roads. Imagine the logistics of feeding the animals and the men who drove them. This supply chain would have been the most monumental undertaking in human history, dwarfing the construction of the railroad itself. The crime, and then the cover-up. First came the cataclysm. Call it a mud flood, call it a plasma event, call it a weaponized resonance frequency that triggered global soil liquefaction. The name is less important than the result. The ground did not just shake, it dissolved. Entire cities sank in moments, not by feet, but by floors. The foundations of a Type 1 civilization were swallowed by a planet turned to quicksand. This event was surgically precise. It buried the infrastructure, severing the physical connections, but more importantly, it disrupted the very medium through which the old power flowed. It was a blow to the Earth's electromagnetic field, a scrambling of the planetary grid's operating frequency. The hum of the world, the resonant carrier wave that powered everything from the trains to the streetlights, went silent. The machine stopped not for lack of fuel, but for lack of a signal. The network was unplugged from its source. It was a global blackout from which there was no immediate recovery. A great and terrible quiet fell upon the world. Then, in the eerie silence of the aftermath, the second stage began. The true crime. The engineering of forgetting. From the chaos, a new order emerged. A parasitic elite, the opportunists of the reset, who understood exactly what had been lost. Yet, in the historical record, it is a ghost. There are no detailed ledgers for this gargantuan effort. There are no epic accounts of the supply lines. There is only a great silence, where the machinery of a functioning civilization should be. And then, there is the human element. The narrative speaks of tens of thousands of workers, a vast army of laborers. An army, as any general knows, marches on its stomach. To feed 20,000 men in the remote wilderness requires a constant, unbroken chain of provisions, tons of flour, salted meat, coffee, and clean water every single day. Where did this food come from? How was it preserved and transported? The logistical effort to sustain the workforce would have been a daily miracle, a far greater feat than the laying of track itself. We are asked to believe that this was managed flawlessly for 6 years across a continent by men with ledger books and mule trains. It strains credulity to the breaking point. This wasn't a construction project. By the laws of logistics, it would have been a meticulously planned, permanent migration. Now we turn our audit from construction to operation, to the very heart of the cold deception. The official narrative presents the steam locomotive as a brute force engine, a simple beast of fire and water. Their objective was not to repair, but to permanently erase. They initiated a planetary-scale archive burning. The first step was to introduce a new form of power, a crude, dirty, and beautifully controllable substitute. They gave us the coal deception. They funded the mines, built the supply chains, and sold us a narrative of brute force progress. They made us dependent on a finite resource they could own, meter, and sell. They built a prison of fuel and convinced us it was a palace of industry. Simultaneously, they launched an assault on the mind. The old science, the physics of the ether, of resonance and vibration, was systematically purged from our institutions. It was ridiculed, branded as mysticism, and erased from the curriculum. The libraries were cleansed, the patents were buried, the engineers who might have remembered were silenced. This was the intellectual lobotomy of a species. They replaced our true history with a cover story, a plausible but impossible fairy tale of rugged pioneers with picks and shovels building a global empire in a single generation. They took the inheritors, the scavengers of the old world like Vanderbilt and Mawa, and recast them as heroic inventors and captains of industry. They turned the grave robbers into founding fathers. They gave us their story and took ours. But this simple machine is a thermodynamic nightmare, A standard locomotive of that era consumed appalling quantities of fuel and water. To travel just a few hundred kilometers, it would burn through several tons of coal and require tens of thousands of liters of water. Let us scale this up. To run a continental network with hundreds or thousands of trains in operation at any given time would require a constant, massive infusion of coal and water at regular intervals across the entire line. This necessitates a colossal, secondary infrastructure. You need coal mines, and you need a way to transport the coal from the mines to every single remote coaling station. The absurdity quickly becomes apparent. You would need a second parallel railway network operating at full capacity just to carry the fuel for the first network. A significant portion of every coal train's cargo would be consumed by its own engine, simply to make the delivery. It is an energetically negative system. It is a snake eating its own tail. It is a violation of sound engineering and economic principles. This is why the early photographs are so damning. We see locomotives with inexplicably small tenders. The car is meant to hold coal and water. We see designs that seem to prioritize form and strange metallic ornamentation over the raw, functional necessity of fuel storage. We were left as orphans in our own home, taught to marvel at the crude steam engine while standing inside a silent, deactivated energy plant we called a train station. Their greatest weapon is the silence they engineered. Our greatest defense is to break it. This knowledge is not meant to be held. It is meant to be spread. Send this transmission to another mind that is ready to awaken. And so, we arrive at the final, unavoidable truth. We are a civilization with amnesia, living in a home we don't recognize, using tools we don't understand. We are the inheritors of a silent, resonant world, and we have filled it with noise and smoke. This is our great cosmic orphanhood. We walk through the halls of giants, mistaking their power plants for cathedrals and their energy conduits for train stations. We travel in sophisticated machines, vessels designed to draw clean, limitless power from the very fabric of the environment. Yet we force-feed them the burnt bones of the earth. The black plume of smoke from a steam engine is not a symbol of industrial might. It is the visible symptom of a profound technological sickness, a constant, rolling funeral pyre for a future that was stolen from us. This is the source of the deep, gnawing cognitive dissonance that haunts modern humanity. It is because they were not designed for coal. They were machines from another paradigm, retrofitted by a cargo cult of survivors who only understood the most primitive application of their power: light a fire to boil water. The final entry in our audit is the most profound: the intellectual vacuum. Where are the blueprints? Not the romanticized sketches we see in museums, but the detailed, to-scale engineering schematics required to build these complex machines and monumental stations. Where are the metallurgical treatises detailing the specific alloys needed for the boilers, the stress calculations for the cyclopean iron arches of the train sheds? Where are the operating manuals for this inherited technology? They do not exist in any coherent or comprehensive form. We are given the story of heroic inventors who conjured these systems from thin air, yet we are denied the very engineering legacy that would prove it. It is like finding a modern microchip in a tomb and being told the occupant invented it with a hammer and chisel, but left no notes. The mathematics do not lie. The physics are unyielding. The official history of the railway age is not a record of construction. It is a cover narrative for an act of discovery and appropriation. They did not build this network. The pervasive sense that something is fundamentally wrong, that the timeline is broken. We are told we crawl from the mud with sticks and stones, yet we are surrounded by impossible architecture we could not replicate today. We are taught a history of heroic inventors, yet the logistics of their achievements crumble under the slightest scrutiny. This feeling is not paranoia. It is the ghost of a memory, the echo of a forgotten truth struggling to break through the static of the official narrative. It is the intended final lock in the control matrix, to make us feel small, primitive, and eternally dependent. To question the coal is to pull the first thread that unravels the entire fabrication. It is to understand that the progress we have been sold was not an ascent, but a carefully managed descent. A great deviation, steering us away from energy freedom and toward energy servitude. Every grand, old-world train station is more than a relic. It is a piece of a suppressed physics, a component of a global machine waiting to be understood. They are not museums to a bygone era. They are prompts for a future we are meant to reclaim. This investigation, therefore, ceases to be about ancient buildings or forgotten technology. It becomes an act of reclaiming human dignity. They found it, largely intact, buried under the evidence of a recent cataclysm. They cleared the tracks, repaired the machines with a crude and dirty power source they could understand, and then they engineered the most successful deception of all. They wrote themselves into the story as its creators. The numbers present a stark equation of impossibility, an audit that results in a finding of profound fraud. If there is a variable we have missed, a factor that makes this equation balance, the historical record has yet to reveal it. Perhaps you can see it. But what we see is the cold, hard arithmetic of a lie. The numbers do not close. The official account of the Transcontinental Railroad is not just a story with holes. It is a logistical void, an industrial impossibility. Once you accept this anomaly, once you see the sleight of hand in one country's history, the pattern recognition software in your mind activates. The question ceases to be asterisk, how they faked the construction in America. The real question becomes, where else did they run the same operation? The answer is as breathtaking as it is disturbing. Everywhere. The deception was not local, it was global. Prepare for a sense of geographic vertigo. We are told the late 19th century was an age of competing empires, of burgeoning national identities, each forging its own path into the industrial age. It is the process of remembering that we are not the desperate, carbon-burning creatures of the history books. We are the descendants of a far more elegant and enlightened civilization, a people who understood the subtle energies of the cosmos. Our birthright is not toil and pollution, but harmony and resonance. Our greatest loss was not the technology itself, but the memory of who we were when we wielded it. The engineering of forgetting was nearly perfect, but its perpetrators made one critical error. They left the evidence standing all around us. The investigation does not stop here. It is only the beginning. If you feel the resonance of this lost truth, if you are prepared to continue excavating the layers of the Great Deception with us, then subscribe and activate the signal. Welcome to the resistance. This is the foundational lie. What the physical evidence shows is not competition, but conformity. Not divergence, but a chilling, monolithic uniformity. Let us take a journey, not by train, but by observation. Look at the Chhatrapati Shivaji terminus in Mumbai, India, completed in 1887. A Gothic titan of domes, turrets, and intricate carvings that would make a European cathedral blush. Now, jump 10,000 kilometers to Melbourne, Australia. Flinders Street Station, completed in 1909. The same grand arches, the same clock tower, the same imposing presence. Another 10,000 kilometers. Buenos Aires, Argentina. The Retiro Railway Station, opened in 1915. The same colossal steel and glass canopy, the same monumental scale, a palace for machines dropped into a city still dominated by horse-drawn carts. From the Calais Railway Station in Budapest to the Gare de Lyon in Paris, from the old Peking-Hankow railway stations in China with their strange European-style brickwork, to the Maputo Railway Station in Mozambique, designed by an associate of Gustave Eiffel. The pattern is relentless, the same architectural DNA, the same technological signature, blooming simultaneously across the globe in a time of supposed primitive communication and transport. We are asked to believe that dozens of separate nations, with vastly different cultures, materials, and engineering capabilities, all independently decided to build the exact same type of energy harvesting, palatial train stations, all within the same narrow window of a few decades.